shall ascend the hill of the Lord? And who shall stand in his holy place?
He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully. He will receive blessing from the Lord, and vindication from the God of his salvation.
Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of the God of Jacob. Selah.
Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in.
Who is the King of glory?
The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in.
Who is this King of glory?
The Lord of hosts, he is the King of glory. Selah.
This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
If you'll indulge me, I'll share my favorite Father's Day story. This was 6 or 7 years ago. I was by myself. Lisa, all three of my kids were somewhere. I was somewhere driving back from out of town after dark. I pulled up in my driveway, house is pitch black dark. I had a little twinge of feeling sorry for myself, but I thought, no, this will be fine. What I had no way of knowing is that my son had changed his plans, had driven to Charlotte, parked down the street, and was crouched just inside the back door, waiting for Dad. I opened the door, and he tackles me with this banshee scream, and I'm thinking, this is how my life ends. And he was like a bodybuilder. I couldn't get up, and then he just burst out laughing. It's best Father's Day ever. Great fun. Psalm 24, the ancient Israelites. Let's say you lived in a little town in the central part of Israel, Jezreel or someplace. It had been a year since you were in the temple, and you were so excited because it was Passover. You would join with other pilgrims in a caravan to come to the place, and you know, when they rounded the hill and saw the temple for the first time, they had to weep for joy. And the Psalm 24 tells about the worship service that they had. They began by singing a hymn, which you did just a few moments ago. And the hymn begins, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof." 1 week ago, Lisa and I were winding up a vacation in Montana at Glacier National Park. I had a coat on 1 week ago. Hard to believe. And while we were in Glacier, we did what I guess people are supposed to do. We took photos of the natural wonders of Glacier National Park and posted them to Facebook. I think the reason to do this is to make people who are hot in Charlotte green with envy, I think, is the only reason. And we would post the photos, and what I love are the comments that people made. People said, God's artistry is amazing. God's work is so beautiful, and that's certainly true. When you go to a place like Glacier, you see God's beauty, stone, snow-capped mountains, lakes, and so on. But the psalm says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And that would include the unphotogenic places. That would include the places nobody ever goes on vacation, places that people have never seen. It's all God's. We're to be attentive to all of it. We're to care for all of it. The psalm says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. And that would be all the people who dwell therein. And that's the good-looking, cool ones, your family and friends that you enjoy being around. But it's also the less photogenic people, the people you don't know, the people that are different from you, the people that may get on your nerves a little bit, the people that think wrong politically. All who are within it, they are the Lord's. We're to care for them. We're to be attentive to them. I love the back and forth litany of their service. They say, lift up your heads, O gates. They're asking the gates of the temple to open up so they can come in procession to the service. Maybe as if you came here and you stood outside. Try this next Sunday. You could stand outside and say, open up, O doors. And Jerry or Chuck, one of the ushers, opens the door for you and you come in. course, they said that the King of Glory may come in. They carried the Ark of the Covenant in procession into the temple, right? The King of Glory may come in. I thought about this. This would be actually a good prayer for each one of us to pray all the time, right? Open up, you gates. These are the gates of your heart. Open up, O gates of my heart, that are myself, my selfishness, my cynicism, my regret, my fantasies, all that I'm attached to. Open up my busy calendar. Open up, oh my busy calendar, that the King of Glory, that God may come in. That God may come in. Open up. We processed in earlier. We should have all you worshipers process in. The choir did so. We always worry what we might have forgotten how to do over 15 months. Choir, good job. Processed in very nicely. I processed in. I forgot to do it a couple weeks ago. It's hard. Processing is interesting. Robert Barron is a Catholic priest. He's a monk. He lives in a monastery. And he points out they process everywhere. They process to dinner. They process to breakfast. They process to their afternoon chores. They process to evening prayers. They're always in a line with other people going somewhere. He said, I love all of this processing because one, it means I'm not alone. And two, it means we're going somewhere. We're not just passing randomly through life. Maybe it feels that way sometimes, like, oh, it's June, it's July, we're just passing randomly through life. But when you process into the house of God, we're going somewhere. We're going somewhere together. One of my worries coming out of the pandemic is that folks will have forgotten how to come to church. Those of you who are here, you remembered how to come. Well done. Some of you at home, you have forgotten how to come to church. I was at a wedding yesterday, and a guy came up to me and he said, I've been watching you on TV. And I said, it's not TV. But it feels like TV, and I get it. I've had any number of people over the past couple of weeks say, I kind of dig doing church at home. I've got my coffee, I'm in my pajamas, I'm on my back porch. I really like church at home. I get that. But you know, we need to get up and go. There's something to getting up physically, get out of the bed, you get dressed, and you come to the sacred house of the Lord. Your home may be a wonderful place, but this is God's house. And we need to do this together, not just when it's convenient for me at home. Now, some of you, you're watching online permanently. You live in another country. We're glad that you joined us. But even then, thinking about that physical act, I love back during the pandemic, I heard about a mother who lives here and her daughter who lives in the United Kingdom. They worship every Sunday together, but they make it a physical act. So what they do, they've got it up on their TV, and then they got their phones, and when it's time to walk in, they walk in together. They sit down together. It's a beautiful thing. Something about that physical act of coming. Muscle memory, sacred place. You may know that an interesting feature in our church, if you don't know about it, you should. We have a labyrinth in the Francis Chapel. When we first built Francis Chapel, it just had a floor, like any room has a floor. But after a while, we came back and we put a labyrinth on the floor. You know, maybe you've been to medieval cathedrals. They have labyrinths, and the labyrinth is interesting. The labyrinth is a physical, spiritual quest. You walk around on this thing for a while to get to your goal. Now, the American thing to do, right, is the goal is to get to the center of the labyrinth. If you're an American, you know what to do. You start at the edge, you just walk to the middle, and you've done it. Check mark. I made it to the goal. But with the labyrinth, you don't do that. You take your time, you kind of go this way, and then you kind of go this way. And sometimes you turn your back on the goal, and sometimes you turn toward the goal. Sometimes you're furthest from the goal when actually you're closest to the goal. It takes some time. It takes some patience. Your spiritual life is like this. It takes time. Sometimes you feel like you're turning your back on God, but that may actually be a hopeful thing because then you're far from God, but you're actually then closer to God, coming toward the goal. I was trying to think over the past couple of weeks, getting ready to preach today. I had 2 weeks since I was off last week, so the sermon may be longer than usual. Sorry about that. That's how it goes. I thought about people walking places with some purpose. The Wizard of Oz. Years ago in my first church, I was the pastor. I was the youth minister. I was the custodian. I was the only employee. I did everything. I had a little youth group. I took them to the beach. We're at the beach having a great trip, but one day there was this horrible windstorm, gale force winds that came up, sand everywhere, and I realized all my children are out of the house. So I'm like a mother hen trying to gather my children up. So I pull them into the house. It seems really dangerous, and I've got them all in. I count heads. I'm missing one. Leslie. Where is Leslie? No one knows. I go out into the wind to save Leslie, and I'm looking for Leslie. And I see her across the way, and she's screaming, and I'm thinking, oh, I must save Leslie. I get closer to her, and I realize what she's screaming. She's screaming, Auntie M! Auntie M! And I was just like, oh, you're on your own. Yeah, good luck. Dorothy took to the yellow brick road with a scarecrow, a tin man, and a lion. And what her three friends were after were what? A brain, a heart, and some courage. And what Dorothy's after is home. And Frank Oz, who wrote that, wasn't trying to be religious, but it occurs to me that's why we come here. We're trying to find our way home to God. We want minds that can think the thoughts of Christ. We want hearts that can love as Christ loved. We want some courage. Some courage. Other times you process with people. I did a wedding yesterday. It reminded me of my wedding. My wedding was here, March 1st, 1986. We processed down this aisle. It was interesting. First, guys, the people that meant the most, the men that meant the most to me in life, they processed in, stood over here. The women, Lisa's bridesmaids, came in. The women most important to her, they stood over here. The photos reveal that they wore dresses that you wonder why anybody thought those were attractive. But it was 1986. And then Lisa processed in, and we came up to this altar. And when we did that, we were doing what all of us do when we come to worship, hopefully. We came here seeking God's blessing. We came here to make promises in the eyes of God. And that's what we do when we come to church. We want to be blessed by God. We want to make promises in the eyes of God. The funny thing about the vows, if you think about the vows that people make at a wedding, they're other directed. They're not about me. They're about the other. Nobody at a wedding says, I promise that I shall be very happy in this marriage. I promise that I shall derive great pleasure from this marriage. I promise that this marriage will be so much fun for me. No, you promise to the other, sickness and in health. I will tend to you in sickness and in health. I will forsake all others for you. It's other directed. That's the way church is. We come here to be blessed. We come here to be saved. But at the end of the day, we come here because we want to save everybody else. We come here because we want to be a blessing to everybody else. That's how church is. It's not about us. It's about the people that aren't here. Oddly, I try to think about the way our walking, our physical actions can actually make a difference in the world. I spoke 2 weeks ago. I got kind of emotional about it, about my friend Richard Harris. And many of you may remember Richard. He often read scripture here. He sang in our Church in the Round Singers. Richard died back in November. We dedicated a new song to him 2 weeks ago. His mother came, sat here at 11. It's really moving. And there was a photo in that song of me with Richard in Selma, Alabama. Richard was interesting. People say February is Black History Month. For Richard, Black History Month was January and February. It was all months were Black History Month. And he loved being in Selma. We walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, as John Lewis and those other protesters did in 1965. And then they walked from Selma to Montgomery. There's a famous photo of this, a prize-winning photo by a guy named James Corrales. He caught a picture of those protesters walking. I love the photo. It almost looks like they're about to soar up to heaven, even though they're walking, right? But yet they're dark clouds because there's still more work to be done. That march didn't solve everything. What you have here are people who say the way things are is not the way things God they're not the way God would have things to be, right? There's so much down here that is not a God. There are people who are behind gates, who are behind bars. They need to be set free. We are going to walk peacefully to try to change the world. What does God call us to do peacefully to try to change the world? Yesterday was Juneteenth. I live in Plaza Midwood, couldn't get through town. Massive Juneteenth celebration. If you know about Juneteenth, it was on June the 19th that General Gordon Granger, I have a friend, she has sons named Gordon and Granger. General Gordon Granger brought 2,000 soldiers into Galveston, Texas, and he went from place to place, the Osterman Building, the courthouse, the Customs House, the Reedy Chapel AME Church, and read General Order Number 3. If you know the background of this, the Civil War had ended 2 months earlier, but it hadn't gotten to Texas yet. So you still had slaves in Texas. And General Gordon came to say, everybody here is free. Except they weren't really free yet, right? Because he announced that they were free, and blacks in Galveston celebrated, and lo and behold, white Texans, flogged black people for celebrating on the original Juneteenth. The reason I bring this up is that we're always called to go somewhere to bring news to somebody that everybody is free. If everybody isn't free, nobody's free. This is our task. We walk, we ask, who is disadvantaged? Who is behind the gates? Who does not have freedom? We want them to have freedom. We want them to have joy. We want them to have life. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. I'll close with this thing that it always strikes me as funny, and as I get older, it's not funny at all. It's a wonderful thing. Years ago, I read Pat Conroy's novel, The Prince of Tides, and one of the funny moments in the book came when Good Friday arrived. Tom, the narrator, his grandfather's a very pious man indeed. And every year on Good Friday, he'd fashion this massive wooden cross, and he would carry it through the town of Colleton, dragging the cross on his shoulder. And Tom's grandmother, not as pious and frankly embarrassed by what her husband was doing, she celebrated Good Friday every year by not getting out of bed and drinking a bottle of gin while her husband carried the cross. As he got older, the cross got heavier and heavier, and he couldn't manage it, so he attached a little wheel to the bottom of the cross. And as Pat Conroy describes it, then when he would carry the cross through the town of Colleton, you could hear the wheel squeaking. I always thought that was very funny. The day we buried my mother in York, South Carolina, it was Ash Wednesday, and Lisa and I we were almost to the cemetery, had my mother's ashes on the seat between us. And I noticed a man by the side of the road, and I thought he was a worker at first, and I realized it was a guy dragging a cross. And as I got closer, I saw there was a little wheel under the cross. I rolled my window down. Sure enough, I heard a little squeaking. I was tempted to laugh, but I'd come there to bury my mother, and I tried to think about that man doing something that most people in the world would think of as ridiculous, carrying a cross through a town. Wish I'd had the time. I wish I could have stopped and asked him, why are you doing this? What is this to you? Because the world's looking at him like he's ridiculous, and they're all snickering, but he does this. I doubt he would say, I hope to look ridiculous and be snickered at. I think if I'd asked him, he would have said, that procession that Jesus made from his trial to Calvary, to be crucified, to give his life for us means so much to me. I want to be part of it. I want to feel it. I want to re-experience that. And the world can think it's ridiculous, but we know that it is not ridiculous at all. That's the way Jesus came to save us. And maybe the greatest of all the processionals was the processional of Jesus coming out of the tomb on Easter Sunday morning. The Romans killed him, and they rolled a stone against the tomb, and they put a detail of soldiers out there to be sure he stayed dead, because that's what people do. People just stay dead, but Jesus didn't stay dead. The angels rolled away that stone, and Jesus came out. We tend to think Jesus came out by himself. He appears alone to Mary Magdalene. He appears alone to the disciples. But medieval painters got it right, I think. When Jesus comes up out of that tomb on Easter Sunday morning, he's not alone at all. He actually has his hand outstretched behind him, and he is pulling a crowd of desperate people with him. When Jesus came out of that grave, he was raising those who were dead. He was raising those who were lost. He was raising those who were in hell, who had nothing at all going for them, and he brought them out with him. He brings us out with him. Friends, we come to this place because this is the only place that I know of where we come to be blessed. We come to make promises in the eyes of God. We make promises to serve God and to be a blessing out there. And when I do weddings, by the way, I met a newlywed couple coming in that I hadn't met before. I always when I do weddings, I did this yesterday. I always, when it's over, we go out and the couple's a little lost, like, what do we do now? And I say, well, you have to do a selfie with me, and that makes it official. And I can see they're trying to process this, like, does he submit this to the courthouse? So we do the selfie, and what I love about the selfie with the newlyweds is how utterly clueless they look, right? And it's not their fault. When I got married here, there's photo evidence. Lisa and I look pretty clueless. And it's fine to be clueless. What life's about is walking forward in an adventure, and you don't know where it's going to go or how long it's going to be or the shape of it. You have your plans, but your plans are funny at the end of the day. It's not what you plan. It's that God is with you, and you go out to fulfill your promises to each other and to God and to be blessed and to be a blessing. What couples never realize at that point that we're doing that selfie is that they just promise to tend to one another in sickness and in health, but they feel good right then and don't anticipate that'll ever really happen. Maybe when we're 98 or something, I don't know. And they promise till death do us part. But I think that'll happen when we're 103 and we'll die together in our sleep, maybe. But sickness comes, death comes, one's left behind. You promised it, and you came to the altar. And what you trusted then is that God will be with us. Death doesn't get the last word. God will lead us in a great procession all the way to heaven. All will be well. All will be good. All will be blessed, because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Thanks be to God.
Lift up your hands.